To the sound of electric guitar, nothing inspires awe and revelry like a cranked up Marshall Plexi. As it should, it is and forever shall be the sound of rock guitar. I was lucky enough to borrow a 1969 50-watt Plexi over the weekend. It belongs to my buddy Perry at Ormsby Guitars, and it sounds pretty glorious. I did a full-length video with it that I'll link in the video description. Now, as soon as I finished playing through that amp, I thought, which 50-watt Plexi in the Axe FX is going to be the closest? There's several. There's the 50-watt 6CA7 versions over here, so a standard version and a jumped version. There's one with 6550 power tubes, two different high channel versions of the 50-watt Plexi, and a Plexi 50-watt jumpered and normal. I believe these are based on several different vintage amps that Fractal Audio owns. Now, what I did was I used the tone match block and I set up all of these 50-watt models with the same settings as the real amps. So the volume, which is called gain in the model at noon, bass all the way off, middle, treble, and presence absolutely cranked up, and using the tone match block basically to give me a visual backup to what my ears were hearing, and there's a readout of it there. It's pretty flat. That's pretty amazing, right? I settled on this 50-watt 6CA7 model, and sometimes trying to match vintage amps can be a little bit of a wild goose chase, but this was just set the model at the same settings as the vintage amp and go. And yeah, this is what we get. I'll play you a few more things on it, and we'll take a look at a few kind of virtual mods that you can make in here, which make this even better, in my opinion. That the model gives you that glassy cleanup that the real amp will give as well. Now, we can play around with this and get super nerdy with the advanced parameters in here. This is something that Fractal gives you access to that no other modeler would. For example, we could go into the power supply section over here and Variac the model. So if I go over to scene 3 over here, you can see I've set the Variac to 75%. Somewhere between like 70 and 80% is great if you want to cop a little bit of that Eddie vibe out of basically any amp model, but particularly the Plexis. The amp has this glorious squelch when you really dig into those open chords. kind of makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and the model is copying that so well. One trick that I stumbled across, and this is probably not a great thing to try with your real amp, was when I got the amp, it's got one of those old school Marshall impedance selectors where you kind of have to pull out these pins and set them. And let's just say when I was testing this against the amp, I had a bit of an impedance mismatch, and not the sort of impedance mismatch you want. So I was playing the amp going, this sounds really cool. It's like more scooped and aggressive. The axe is more mid-forward. What's happening? And then I realized I had put the impedance selector on the wrong value. Don't tell anybody about this. I mean, I'm putting it up on the internet. What's the worst thing that could happen? But I did not blow the amp up. The amp's fine. We can replicate that with the axe effects. And this is a bit of an esoteric little parameter to play around with, but I really like the sound of it. So if we go to the power amp page in here, there's this speaker impedance parameter, and you can make some subtle tweaks to this, which would emulate, say, the difference between using a 16 ohm Celestion greenback and an 8 ohm Celestion greenback, or running a 4 ohm amplifier into an 8 ohm load. And there's a really great section of the Fractal forum called Tech Notes, where Cliff Chase, the CEO of Fractal Audio, the person who came up with all of this stuff, explains how all this works. So, for example, if you were running an 8 ohm amp into a 16 ohm load, you would set this speaker impedance to 2. But if you're an idiot like me, and you run a load that's maybe a little bit too high into a load that's a little bit too low, and you get away with not blowing an amp up, you would turn this down. So what I found was setting the speaker impedance at 0.5 gives you this really cool, like amp about to explode kind of sound. Let's just hear them side by side again. I'm gonna play some more Schenker. Now you can use slightly lower versions of that or slightly higher versions of it. It's a really nice way to emulate some real world behavior. Stuff like this is why I still think the Fractal amp modeling is untouched by anything out there on the market. It's amazing that this was thought of, measured, and implemented for us to play around with. So you too can be an absolute moron and run your real amps the right way and then replicate that behavior in the model if you think that's something that sounds cool. And I'm definitely a moron who thinks that sounds cool. I really appreciate this speaker impedance control here, throwing it together with the Variac and cranking up the supply sag. You know, you can emulate all sorts of weird real world behavior in there, or you can take that out if you want a more perfect plexi, for use of a better term. But most of us who like the sound of these old amps like them because of their imperfections and their character. Something I didn't mention at the start of the video, as always, I'm using my free cab IR. You can get that one for free in the video description. One fun tweak you can make to this to emulate, say, a 70s studio where you might have been recording to tape through some nice mic preamps is go to the cab block, go to the preamp tab, and you can play around with different preamp types and add preamp drive and saturation. I like a bit of this tape on the high quality mode, bit of drive, bit of saturation. It just adds some character. Again, let's have a listen to that. You can get super nerdy about this, or you can just bring up the model, twist the knobs until it sounds good, and then make a bunch of loud guitar noises. He who has the most fun wins, in my opinion, when it comes to playing the electric guitar. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll put a link to this preset in the video description, along with my free IR and some of the music that I make with my band Ragdoll. There's also a link to my Patreon if you want to support my channel directly. What I'm going to do now, though, is take this amp model, run it through some pitch detune, some delay, and maybe leave this graphic EQ set up as a mid boost into it, kick a phaser on, and I'll just play you all out with some more greasy guitar noises. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.